In 1988, we took a 2-week mission team trip to Ecuador, and we brought our 2 children with us. Our son was 8 and our daughter was 5, and that was their first experience living overseas for a short period of time. And the second half of our trip, we were in Quito. We were at a church service one night, and my husband said he felt this warmth come over him and just this incredible love and opening of his heart toward the Ecuadorian people. And he perceived a voice in his head saying to him, "You will come back here." A moment later, he turned to me and he asked if I had a pencil and paper. And after I gave it to him, after a few minutes, I looked over his shoulder and he was writing things like sell the law practice, sell the cars, sell the airplane. My husband had a lot of toys. Schooling for the children, medical insurance. And I instantly, in my heart, it was like the Lord just kind of opened up the bigger picture and said, something's going on here. The thought that God was pulling us out of our lives there in Northern California and was beginning to show us something out there that He had for us was incredibly exciting to me, and I was on board from the beginning. It was a couple years, probably about a year and a half, that we felt things were finally coming together. During that time, we made more mission trips to Guatemala. We were house parents at an orphanage there run by the Verbo Church. And it was during that time that we saw the blessing that was foster care by loving families, also the blessing that was adoption. It was just beautiful to see this. And we knew that whatever we were going to be doing in Ecuador was going to have something to do with adoption, and that we wanted to be a channel, a way of facilitating these children. We wanted to be part of the adoption opportunity.